Hello everybody, it's Tanya and welcome to today's video. This video has been in the making for a long time, but I am finally ready to tell you the story about how Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky wrote The Idiot. So if you don't know, if you're new to this channel, recently I finished reading The Idiot by Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky. I have still conflicting feelings about this novel. Like, I really love certain parts about it, and certain parts about it were not my favorite. I will not go into detail because I have made a whole review video about The Idiot, so I will link it up here if you want to watch. But when I was reading this novel, at the same time I was also reading about it and how it was written and the process of Dostoevsky writing this novel, and I thought it was so interesting because there are I found quotes from his notes when he was writing the novel, and those quotes are practically essays. Those are like essays on human nature, essays on like personalities of his characters and what he wanted to portray with them, and I thought it was so interesting, and I just really wanted to share it with you, and I really wanted to make this video and to show you the process and like history behind this book, because if you know the history of the book, you look at the novel differently as well. If you know what struggles the writer went through while writing the novel, you will look at the book differently as well. And yeah, so basically this whole video is going to be history behind the novel, behind The Idiot, and how Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky wrote this novel, The Idiot. So in preparation of this video, I used 3 articles which I found on the internet. I will link them down below in the description box, but they are in Russian. You can, I think you can translate them into English in like Google Chrome, right? Because Chrome gives you like an option like translate into English, so you can try that. I'm not sure if it's, I don't know, like readable, if it's going to be readable, but you can try. I didn't try that. If you are Russian and if you read Russian, then you have no problems. You can just read those articles. They're really interesting and they're like very much in depth. What I will be saying in this video, obviously, like I cannot say because those articles like big. Plus, I also used Leonid Grossman's biography of Dostoevsky, so I have a lot of information and I cannot fit it into like this whole video unless I don't want it to be like 3 million years long. So I highly encourage you to read those articles. They will be down below in the description box, like I said. And if you can find Leonid Grossman's biography of Dostoevsky, I will check if it's in English. If it's not, well, then it's only in Russian. But it's really well written. When I was reading it, it's so readable. I absolutely loved this biography. I haven't read like the whole thing. I only read the part which was about the idiot and his time like writing the idiot, but it was really like interesting, and yeah, it really shows you Dostoevsky as a person, as a personality, rather than just this like big famous name. You actually get to know him as a person. So yeah, biography by Leonid Grossman, highly recommended. I need to read it, the whole thing myself. But yeah, so basically this will be the main 4 sources that I used for this video. 3 articles that I link down below and Grossman's biography. And now, with no further ado, let's begin. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky was writing the novel The Idiot in the course of, you can say, 1.5 years, if you like, if you take the whole process. But like this specific version that we are reading now, he wrote it in a year, because like the previous half a year he was working on a different version, which is like very different from this novel, and he actually called this second version a new book. Like he started working on a new book because it's really different. So, but if you take like the whole period of him working, it's 1.5 years. He started working on the novel in September 1867, and he completed the book in the end of January 1869. when he was writing it, he was not in Russia. The whole period of him writing the novel, he was actually traveling abroad in Europe. So the book was written in different cities in Europe. Till the end of May 1868, he was writing it in Geneva. Then, after Geneva, he and his wife moved to Vevey in Switzerland, and they stayed there until September 1868. After Vevey, they moved to Milan in Italy, and they stayed in Milan till the middle of November 1868. And after Milan, they went to Florence, and the end of the novel, the very last chapters of the novel, were written in Florence. And so he finished in the end of January 1869. So that's like a timeline and the geography of the novel where he was writing it. And you can actually notice kind of, European influence in this novel, because he talks a lot about Swiss landscapes. And if you read the novel, you know that our protagonist, Prince Myshkin, he returns back to Russia from Switzerland, where he spent, I don't remember how many years, 4 years? Maybe 4 years of his life in a hospital, right? So you will see references also to European art in this book, which Dostoevsky himself witnessed, and art that inspired him a lot for this book. So European influence is very much present in this novel. Why he went to Europe? Why did he have to spend 4 years of his life in Europe? That happens because in 1864 his older brother Mikhail dies, and Dostoevsky becomes like the head of the family, so he has to provide for the family. Plus, his brother had a lot of creditors, and now the debts that used to be his brother's now became Fyodor Mikhailovich's debts, and he had to pay them. However, he never had the money, and creditors and family as well were pestering him for money because they needed it. And actually his new wife, his second wife, Anna Grigorievna, he got married with her. They got married in February 1867, so half a year prior to him starting the novel, he got married with his second wife. And in her diaries she was remembering that once he came to her house, it was winter, and he came in a fall coat. So fall coat, which is like not warm enough for winter. And she was asking him like, why are you wearing this? This is too cold, you will get sick, it's very dangerous. And he finally, like, he didn't want to tell her, but eventually he told her that his brother's family came to him and they said that the weather became warmer, which means now you can sell your fur coat, your winter coat, and give money to them. So that's what he did. His new wife was obviously like just very angry with his whole family. And this one situation is just an example of how people were pestering him for money, how much they pressuring him. And he had no money. In order to get it, he had to write a novel. And it was very essential for him to write a good novel, a novel that would sell, so he could get the money for life and for his new family that he has just started. And that's why he and Anna Grigorievna decide to go to Europe, to leave Russia. Initially they planned to leave for like maybe a year, for a short period, but eventually turned into 4 years. So they left there in order to be left alone and for Fyodor Mikhailovich to have the opportunity to write his new novel in like quiet and peaceful surroundings. So they leave for Europe. In his letter from April 23rd, 1867, to Apollinaria Suslova. Apollinaria Suslova was his long-time love. They were not married. He offered marriage to her, but she refused. She was like, she inspired a lot of characters in his writing. Like, for example, Nastasia Filipovna's character was very much inspired by Apollinaria Suslova. She was this strong woman, she was this beautiful woman with like a lot of character and passion, and she was just this like fiery personality. So yeah, Nastasia Filipovna was inspired by her. And so he wrote to her, like explaining the reason for his travels in Europe. So again, translation of all the quotes in the video will be mine. So we have already established in the review that I lack in like translation skills. So the beautiful English is up to you. We kind of have to work together here. If you understand, then I'm happy. So translation is not going to be very good, but I did my best. So yeah, basically. Now to the letter. So what he writes to Apollinaria Suslova. He says, I have no money, and I won't have any until the new year. And even then, only if I start working at the novel I am working at currently. But how can I finish it if they won't leave me alone? That's why my wife and I went abroad. I hope to improve my health here and finish my work. Katkov willingly gave me an advance. He pays wonderfully. Katkov is an editor for the journal where Dostoevsky was going to publish The Idiot. So in order to travel abroad, he received an advance from the journal, like 1,000 rubles I think they gave him. First, they go to Germany, and in May 1867 they arrive to Dresden. Fyodor Mikhailovich loved Dresden. The first reason for that love was that the city was quiet and peaceful, and there weren't many people, and he and his wife Anna Grigorievna could just enjoy peaceful life together. And the second reason was Dresden Art Gallery. He loved that place, and as soon as they arrived in May, initially, like Anna Grigorievna was remembering in her diaries, as soon as they arrived, they went to the Dresden Gallery, and passing through all the rooms, they went straight away to the Sistine Madonna by Raphael, because Fyodor Mikhailovich considered that piece of art like the first and the highest example of human genius. So it was like his absolute top favorite art piece, and as soon as he arrived to Dresden, he went to see that art piece in person, like straight away. In that gallery there were also a lot of other Renaissance artists which also inspired him a lot, such as Titian and Rembrandt. While in Dresden, Dostoevsky and his wife were also reading a lot, of course. If you are curious what he was reading, so Leonid Grossman points out in his biography that at that time in Dresden, Dostoevsky was rereading Les Mis by Victor Hugo, which he praised very highly, and he had a lot of respect for that work. And also, which I didn't know, he apparently had very tender feelings towards works of Charles Dickens, and at that time in Dresden he was rereading Old Curiosity Shop and Nicholas I cannot pronounce that name, Nicholas Nickleby. These were like 3 of the books that he was reading at that time. Starting September 1867, he seriously starts working on his novel. But the initial plan, the initial version of the novel was very different from what we have currently. He worked on the first version for half a year, not even half a year, from September till December 1867. And then on 4th of December he kind of stops working on this version completely, and he sets out to work on his new idea. So first, let's talk about this first version of the novel. What was the initial idea? What was his initial thought for the book? This we find in his notebooks that he was using while, preparing the novel. Primarily, Fyodor Mikhailovich was concerned with the search of the protagonist, of his personality, what kind of person he was. The idiot in this first version is very far away from Prince Mishkin, the way we know him now. He is actually closer to Raskolnikov from Crime and Punishment. He was supposed to be a self-centered rebel, and his main trait was self-possession, but not because of a virtue, but rather because of his pride and because of his crazy self-indulgence. The idea of the protagonist was supposed to be rule like a tyrant or die for everybody on the cross. Like that's what was in the notebooks. But even in this version of the character, Dostoevsky planned a big spiritual development for him at the end. However, he didn't really know how to achieve this spiritual development, how to make it truthful and realistic. The story of this first version was actually inspired by a real life law case that became very well known and very talked about in Russian society of that time. The case was called the Umetsky case. Umetsky is the last name of the family. Umetsky case. And Dostoevsky became very much interested in that. Anna Grigorievna was remembering this in her diaries, and she writes, "I remember that in winter of 1867, Fyodor Mikhailovich was interested in the details of famous at the time the Umetsky case. Interested to the extent that he was going to make the heroine of the case, Olga Umetskaya, a character in his novel. The Umetsky case was brought to court in September 1867 in Kashir. Kashir is a city, like a town, more of a town in Moscow region. Parents were accused of torturing and abusing their children, and the older daughter, Olga Umetskaya, she was 16 or 15, I think, at that time. As an act of self-defense and act of protest, she tried to burn down the house where the family lived. And so after that, the case was brought to court and parents were accused. So this law case became like a starting point for the first variant of the novel, where Dostoevsky was going to show a Russian family, but through the example of this Russian family, he wanted to show the degradation of Russian educated class. The story was supposed to be as follows. So we would have this one family with father who arrives back to Russia after traveling for like many years abroad, and he would have a wife who was a respectful figure, but who was very who had a very interesting character, very much like Elizaveta Prokofievna in the final variant of the novel. So she would be like very explosive and she would just speak her mind, so she would have this like very interesting character. And they would have 3 children. So they were supposed to have the elder son who would be adored by his mother and by everybody, a daughter, and then the youngest son, the idiot, who received this title, the idiot, actually from his mother, who despised him. And even though he would be working and he would be providing for the family, the whole family would actually despise him. And he would be this kind of humiliated and abandoned and offended creature who kind of was keeping all the anger, suppressing all the anger inside of him. And then there would be this adopted child, Minyona, whose prototype was Olga Umetskaya from this case. So this would be like kind of the outset, the beginning of the novel. Later on, there would be a love affair between the idiot and a young girl who was sister of his kind of relative. But Dostoevsky writes in his notebooks about like kind of the character of love that this idiot had for this girl. So he writes, "This love is love itself, but also the highest satisfaction of his pride and vanity. It's the last degree of self. It is its kingdom. His love is strange. It's just the feeling without reasoning. He doesn't dream and doesn't think, for example, if it's possible for her to become his wife. He just wants to love. Finally, he fails to see reality. His pride developed to the extent that he doesn't notice that the girl thinks nothing of him. I don't care. I love her for myself," is his reply. It's pride and selfishness at their highest level. She instinctively doesn't believe his love, and that's why thinks nothing of him. Ultimately, if she doesn't know, then at least she feels that he only needs her to satisfy his own self and his own pride. So that was kind of Dostoevsky's thoughts behind the relationship of the idiot with his kind of love interest. And I think you can already notice, like when I was reading this quote, I immediately thought about Aglaya and Ganichka, like immediately. So I think he, even though he thought about like the second draft of the novel as a new book, I think he actually took a lot of his thoughts and ideas from the first draft, but he just kind of changed them in the second draft. So when I was reading this part, I immediately thought about Aglaya and Ganya. Okay, so that's kind of the first variant. Later on, he kind of works more on the main character and the idiot, the character of the idiot, and that's also what he writes in his notebooks. He comes up with the idea of a humiliated and a downtrodden character. So he writes, he is humiliated, he is ashamed of everything, he has hidden feelings, he is wild and humiliated. He does a villainy and thinks that it's the right thing to do. He searches for salvation in his pride, ends up doing a godly act. So it's just like a quote from kind of his notebooks, so that's why it's not very, beautiful. But then there is another quote, like a little bit later in the notebook we see this. He kind of rejects the previous idea. He says, just downtrodden? Nothing will be there except for the downtrodden. It's an old theme. Everything important in the novel, as well as the new thought of the book, will be lost. But I could make it this way. Number 1, downtrodden. Number 2, show what kind of person was downtrodden, what kind of person he was. First of all, downtrodden. Second, full of thirst for life and pleasure. He turned pride itself into poetry and brought pleasure to apotheosis. His wild pride attracts Gero. Gero would be the prototype of Nastasia Philippovna. Even though she understands that given the chance and in the future development, he is capable of committing a crime. Nota bene, important. It is necessary for the reader and all the characters in the novel to understand that he can kill Gero, and for all of them to wait for him to kill her. And finally, the third force of development finally brings him to new view and new road. Later on in his notebook, you see that he chooses actually Shakespearean Othello, Shakespearean Iago. I didn't read that book, so I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. So Shakespearean Iago is like Russian way how we pronounce Shakespearean Iago as kind of the guidance for the character of his idiot. And he writes, The final plan for the novel. Plan for Iago. Idiot's character is like Iago's, but he ends up divinely, gives up and repents. But how to bring such a character to a complete rebirth and resurrection? And Dostoevsky thinks that his love for Gero would not be enough to do that, and he comes up with a storyline which will be present also in the final draft of The Idiot. He comes up with a new character. He kind of changes up the setup of all the characters. He comes up with the idea of this new character who would be a legitimate son of this one uncle. So like I said, so the characters were changed, and now the character of Idiot was an illegitimate son of this one man, and then there would be a legitimate son, and this legitimate son would be like Prince Myshkin, like forgiving and kind and timid. And so this kindness and forgiveness was supposed to bring this kind of Iago character to a rebirth. So that was kind of his second thought. And by the end of October 1867, the kind of final idea for this first draft was defined. So Gero, the prototype of Nastasia Philippovna, was supposed to be in the center, and 5 men were fighting for her affections and for her attention. So one of them would be the Idiot, and then this legitimate son of the man, and then the man itself, and then there would be a general and someone fifth. So there would be like 5 men fighting over this lady. However, he still struggled with the character of the protagonist. He still didn't know how to convey his idea for the novel, for the whole book, through this character. So again, a quote from his notebook. The main idea of the novel: there is so much strength, so much passion in our modern generation, but they don't believe in anything. Boundless idealism with boundless sensualism. Ergo, for such a huge longing, inclined to love and revenge personality, life, passion, and fitting goal are needed. From their childhood, they should have been given more beauty, more love, and a better upbringing. Instead, now, they thirst for beauty and an ideal, but at the same time they don't believe in it, or believe but have no love for it. Demons too believe and shudder. So from this kind of quote, he creates again a new personality for the protagonist of the novel. Protagonist was supposed to become a representative of modern young generation, a huge but at the same time aimless personality. He was supposed to start the romance with Gero out of boredom, and he was supposed to do like evil things also out of boredom. And then through this character he would convey the main idea of the novel, which was a religious one. So the tragedy of the new generation of people was the absence of faith. Does this character remind you of somebody? Like when I say bored, when I say idealist, when I say aimless and inactive, does it remind you of somebody? It should remind you of Pechorin. Pechorin from Hero of Our Time. And so again, Dostoevsky thinks that like it's a used idea, like it's an old idea, and again he is dissatisfied with this. And a few days later in his notebooks, again we find a quote that he rejects the idea. And finally, on the 4th of December 1867, he stops working on this whole first version of the novel completely. He just crosses it out and he just stops. And he writes to Maikov on in the beginning of December in his letter. Maikov was his friend, so he writes to him, "On the 4th of December I decided, to hell with it. I assure you that the novel could turn out mediocre. And I became completely disgusted by it, precisely because it was mediocre and not positively good. I didn't need that." After that, he spends 2 weeks planning a new novel, planning a new version of the novel. And in December 1867, he starts working already on this kind of second version, the final version that we see currently. And the idea of the novel changed completely. You will still notice, like in this book, like for example, this idea of Pichorin, idea of like this, you know, new generation which has no faith but has ideals. You will see it in a different character. If you read this book, you know Hippolyte. I personally feel like this character was just like kind of made into Hippolyte later. So I feel like it's that character. So he doesn't give up the idea completely, but it's not at the center of the novel anymore. The central idea, the main idea, is actually going to be very different. And again, I will read you the letter, which again he wrote to Maikov, so his friend, where he explained his idea. This quote is like a shortened version of a quote from a different letter that he wrote to his niece Sonia. But I read that quote in my review, where he talks about this idea, but just in more detail. He also talks about influences and kind of where he took the idea from. So if you want to hear that quote, it will be in my review. But this is like just a condensed, like a shorter version, which he writes to his friend. So he says, "For a long time now, one thought has been torturing me, but I've been afraid to make a novel out of it, because this thought is too difficult and I am not prepared for it, even though it's very appealing and I love it. The idea is to depict a positively good man. In my opinion, there is nothing more difficult than that, especially in our time. You will of course agree with me. It's only because of my desperate situation that I've decided to give this idea a go. I took a risk, like in a casino. Maybe it will develop under my quill. It's unforgivable." So from this quote you can already see that he took the direction to Prince Myshkin. So he took the direction towards depicting a positively good man. From the quote to Sonia, which is quoted in the review, in that letter he mentions that he is actually very nervous, because a positively good man, first of all, the idea of this positively good man is not formed yet in culture in general, not in Europe, not in Russia. What is positively good man? Nobody knows. And the second problem, he said that the 2 closest characters that he knows of are Don Quixote and Pickwick. Don Quixote being like the closest character to like perfection, to positively good perfection. And in that quote he mentions that these 2 characters are so successful only because they are funny, only because they make the reader laugh. However, he himself, for his new novel, he doesn't have anything like that. He doesn't have a funny character. He wanted to show a serious character, and he didn't know how to make that character appealing to the reader, how to make that character interesting for the reader. But later he finds a way. And again, in his letter to his niece Sonia, like different letter, he writes, "The protagonist is not funny like Don Quixote or Pickwick, but has a different attractive feature about him. He is innocent." The innocence of the main protagonist was supposed to make him appealing for the reader at the end, keeping him serious and not just a funny and entertaining character. In a different letter to a different friend at that period, in March 1868, he wrote that he has been struggling a lot with this novel. He has been struggling so much like never before. He said that too many things depended on this novel being good and on this novel becoming popular with the readers, because he needed the money. He didn't just write it for like the art, he also really needed the money, and he was really stressed about it. The money was always scarce, even during time in Europe. Even though he received that advance from the journal, the advance actually was used up very quickly. And later, after Dresden, he and his wife went to Baden-Baden in Germany, and Baden-Baden is a city which is famous for casinos, and that's where Dostoevsky started playing and going to casino and losing money even faster, because he hoped to win and he hoped to improve the position with the money, but yeah, he was losing it even more. So he was very stressed and nervous about that. And in this letter to his friend, he writes that too many things depend on this book being successful, and if it turns out successful, my situation will be improved, but it can also be a failure. And he said, like, I have a feeling that it's gonna be a failure, and that's why he said that he was in a very like depressed state of mind when he wrote this book. But then a kind of happy event happens in the family, because in March, beginning of March 1868, his first daughter Sonia was born, and Dostoevsky became father for the first time in his life. He was already in his 50s, and so in his 50s he becomes a parent for the first time, and he was so happy. Anna Grigorievna, his wife, was remembering him, how delighted he was, how tender he was with the child, how much he loved her. Like every morning he woke up, he would start asking her, like, how is Sonia, how is she feeling, is she healthy? He was spending a lot of time with her, like pretty much all of his time with her. So he was on like cloud 9 with happiness after the birth of his first child. But the child didn't live long. The child only lived 3 months. She died in May. In May 1868, the first child of Fyodor Mikhailovich got sick with consumption, and she passed because of consumption. And Leonid Grossman, in this biography, he points out that till the end of his life, in his diaries, Dostoevsky was keeping this one kind of strip of paper which said, City of Geneva. Dr. Sylvester was informed that the death of Mademoiselle Sophia Dostoevskaya in the age of 3 months from the birth happened on the 24th of May 1868, and the funeral is booked for the 26th of May 1868 at 4 o'clock p.m. So that was the type of paper that he was keeping till the end of his life. And he was really overcome with grief. And again, Anna Grigorievna was remembering in kind of her diaries that when the child died and Dostoevsky was like kind of standing over her dead body, she said that he was crying like a woman, like I have never seen him cry before, and he was covering this tiny small cold body with like kisses, like her legs and her head, like all of the body with like kisses. And he was really grief-stricken at that time. And because she was sick for like a week prior to her death, and during this whole week he couldn't work because he was very obviously nervous and like afraid for her. And after her death, for like 2 weeks, he also couldn't work because he was overcome with grief. And there is also a letter again to Maikov, where Dostoevsky writes, "This little 3-month-old creature, such poor, such a small creature, for me became a person and a character. She started to know me, to love me, and to smile when I approached her bed. When I was talking to her with my funny voice and was singing songs for her with this voice, she liked to listen to them. She didn't cry when I kissed her. She stopped crying when I approached her crib." And then Anna Grigorievna also in her diaries remembers that the time after Sonia passed, his first daughter passed, it was the only time when he complained about his life, because he had a very difficult life. He never had money, he was obviously very sick with epilepsy, his brother died, and he never had like a child, and this was his first child at the age of 50, and then he loses her after just 3 months. And that was, like she said, it was the only time when he complained about his kind of life and his destiny. But after 2 weeks he starts working on the novel again, because he really needs to finish it, and he really needs to, you know, submit it. He has obligations for the journal where he was going to publish it, so he starts working on the novel again. And that's when he comes up with this idea of innocence for his character, and he finds this way to kind of portray an appealing character for the reader. And that's also when in his notes you start seeing these kind of 2 words, like the Prince cheeses. I also mentioned it in the review. So in his notes, in his notebooks, you would see this kind of formula, Prince cheeses. So cheeses became kind of his guidance for portraying the character of Prince Myshkin. After Sonia's death, Dostoevsky and his wife leave Geneva because they need a change of place. They are really grief-stricken and they need to change their kind of location. So they go to Veve first in Switzerland, and then from Veve they go to Italy, actually, because in Switzerland Dostoevsky got tired, I guess, of the landscape. Again, he wrote in his diaries that this landscape, this like mounty landscape, is not for him, because it kind of limits his outlooks, and he says that he couldn't write anything worthwhile in this landscape. So that's why they go to Italy. First they go to Milan, and while traveling like through Italy, they kind of travel through Italian villages. And in Italian villages he obviously meets Italian villagers which remind him a lot of Russian villagers, and remind him just, you know, kind of Russia. And he feels much better in Italy, and it is in Italy where he continues working on the novel and where he finishes it. So the last few chapters were written in Florence, and he absolutely loved Florence. Like the amount of art, the amount of beautiful architecture in the city, like, inspired him a lot. And he even started kind of thinking of a new kind of work based on, like, you know, Italian history and Florence and Florentine art and stuff like that. So he felt very inspired in Florence. I guess it's impossible not to feel inspired in Florence. I was in Florence once, and it's just a beautiful city. So yeah, I can understand how inspired he was there. So yeah, and it was in Florence where he finished last chapters of The Idiot. And again, in his letter to Maikov, he it was already closer to the end of the novel when he was finishing it, and when he was talking about the ending. If you read the novel, you remember the scene. I will not, for those of you who haven't read it, but I will not spoil, I will do my best not to spoil, but for those of you who read, in the end, like the very end of the novel, you remember the scene with Rogozhin, Prince Myshkin, and Nastasia Filipovna in Rogozhin's house. So the very end. You remember that scene when Prince Myshkin also spent the night in Rogozhin's house. And then there was this scene when the three characters were together. It was for that scene that the novel was written, he said to Maikov. So initially he had the idea of these two rivals standing next to, I don't want to spoil it, I don't want to tell you like kind of what happened, but you know, those who read. So yeah, two rivals standing next to each other, next to the person they loved. And that was for that scene that he wrote the whole novel. So I thought that was really interesting, that he actually started from the end and not from the beginning. In a different letter to Maikov, he talks about the ending of the novel, and so that's what he says. I'm reading from like my notebook. If there are readers for The Idiot, they might be surprised with the ending of the novel, but after giving it a thought, they will of course agree that that is how the novel should be ended. Personally, I think that the ending is a successful one. I'm talking about the ending. I'm not talking about the novel as a whole. I think that the very ending of The Idiot will be very effective and affecting for the reader. I have no idea about success or failure of the novel in Russia. The ending of the novel will decide everything. And then he talks also about the process, how he was writing the last few chapters for The Idiot, and he said that it cost him 2 epileptic seizures, like 2 epileptic seizures happened to him while he was writing the last few chapters. So that's, I guess, how intense emotions he felt while working at the last parts of the novel. So there you have it. I feel like this video was a little bit all over the place. I did my best to structure it like in a, you know, time frame how he was working on the novel, but I don't know, like I feel like it's a little bit all over the place. But yeah, I did my best. Hopefully it was interesting. Hopefully this video was interesting for you. I definitely encourage you to read the articles that I link down below if they are readable in like Google Chrome translation, because it's really interesting how he worked on it. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're having a very good day, and I hope you are staying safe, and I will see you soon in my next videos. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.